Leakey. I'm Global Youth Advancement Network's Global Citizenship Intern, and I'll be moderating today's event. I'm also a senior at MSU, and I'm really excited for this event today. I'm glad you all were able to come, and I'm so excited for this amazing discussion we have today. We have a really impressive panel here today. And before we get started, I'd like to welcome Opal, who leads our Global Youth Advancement Network, to give welcome and opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Hiba. And welcome everyone. I'm Opal Lehman-Varghese, Executive Director of Education Abroad at Michigan State University and Interim Director of the Global Youth Advancement Network, responsible for coordinating this unique event. And on behalf of the Global Youth Advancement Network, I want to officially and warmly welcome you to this Global Voices Roundtable towards a more sustainable future for fashion. We are just thrilled by the wonderful panel that has been assembled, and we sincerely thank each of our contributors for their time, energy, and sharing of insights. The topic we've come here to discuss is so important. It impacts all of us, and examining sustainable fashion from so many different angles and with so many different perspectives is a very exciting prospect. The Global Youth Advancement Network is committed to advancing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and conversations like this give us the opportunity to focus on two of the SDGs in particular, number 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, and number 12, Responsible Consumption and Production. But all of the SDGs are inextricable. Progress in one area can have impacts in another, just as neglect of one area can affect another. We're sure to find that the work of our panelists illuminates some of these challenges, but also offers intriguing opportunities. Finally, I want to thank our colleagues in MSU's Canadian Studies Center for co-sponsoring this event. Their support is greatly appreciated, and it underscores their recognition of the importance of a sustainable future for fashion as well. So once again, thank you one and all. We're really glad that you could join us.
Thank you so much, Opal. And with that, we'll get started. I'll just reiterate a little bit of what Opal said. These Global Voices Sustainable Fashion Roundtable events showcase the work of young global innovators, MSU faculty, and international industry leaders to allow us to contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And this series also serves as a coordinating platform for research and outreach activities at MSU and connect young innovators with faculty and industry mentors. So we have a very impressive panel today, and I'd like to briefly introduce everyone here today. Firstly, we have Morgan Hamill, the president of MH Partners, Inc., a Canadian boutique consulting firm, adept at helping leaders appreciate and communicate moral nuance to build stakeholder trust and long-term value. And she has experience in corporate ethics, academia, and ethical entrepreneurship. Next on our panel is Mary Worrall, the director of collections at Michigan State University Museum, and she previously served as curator of textiles and social justice at the MSU Museum. Her work has included developing and managing exhibitions, research collections, and educational programs. And she has also served on the board of directors of the Quilt Alliance and the American Quilt Study Group, and has many publications, including co-authoring Quilts and Human Rights, and is a core faculty in MSU's Arts, Cultural Management, and Museum Studies program. Next, we have Kathleen Grievers, who leads the education sector of Fashion Revolution USA, FR Italy, and produces global programming through Erasmus and programming within the channels of Fashion Revolution's worldwide community. She holds academic directorship positions with Istituto Lorenzo de' Medici and Asturio Footwear School, and professorial research and teaching roles with Northeastern University and LaSalle University. And she is the founder and CEO of consultancy Seymour Global for international education programming focused on sustainability design initiatives in fashion, textiles, automotive, and footwear sectors. Next, we have Katie Deska, who works at the Michigan State University Surplus Store and Recycling Center as the education coordinator and manages the engagement side of Spartan Upcycle, the Surplus Store and Recycling Center's creative reuse program. Through partnership and events, Katie provides opportunities for the MSU community to practice reimagining and repurposing discarded and secondhand materials, which are sourced through SSRC's campus waste collection and diversion operations. She joined staff in 2018 after working in communications with MSU's Office of International Studies and Programs, and she is a Spartan alum class of 2008. Next, we have Katie. I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name. If you'd like to say it, I don't want to butcher it.
Blaskowitz.
Blaskowitz, Katie Blaskowitz, who's a junior at Michigan State University. She's double majoring in both business management and apparel and textile design. And at MSU, she serves as the assistant creative director of Vim Magazine, a student-run fashion and beauty publication. And she also acts as co-president of MSU's Fashion Design Student Association and is a member of the MSU's Honors College. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We're so excited for the discussion today. And after our brief introductions, I'd like to hand it over to our panel to kind of introduce yourself a little bit, kind of get started on some intro questions about what you do, if it's something I haven't mentioned already, and how you got started, what your goals and inspirations were that led you to your roles today. So if anyone would like to start, please feel free.
Sure, I can kick us off. I'm Kathleen Gravers, and thank you for that really warm introduction, Hiba. I really appreciate it. I started with Fashion Revolution when I was a professor at Rhode Island School of Design, and I kept seeing how other countries were really gaining more traction of understanding sustainability. This was in 2010. And so we started to implement more Fashion Revolution events through artisan expression, through design, and then sustainability initiatives. So I've been with Fashion Revolution since 2014, so the year after it started. Fashion Revolution is now the event that caused Fashion Revolution, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, happened 10 years ago yesterday. So it's been a pleasure to be with such a global community. And I have to say, I'm very excited to be in Michigan, even though right now I'm standing in the middle ground of Italy. But I'm really excited to be here with Michigan because Michigan holds a very close place in my heart. So thank you for this invitation to present.
Thanks for that, Kathleen. It's Morgan Hamill. I'm happy to go next. So as Hibda mentioned, I have a background in academia. I have my master's in applied ethics, and I also worked for 11 years in the ethics office of a large corporation. I then went on to start my own ethical fashion marketing firm, the mission of which was to change the face of fashion by connecting women and responsible brands. And that company was largely on Instagram. So we had 35,000 followers. We developed a business model to connect the women who were interested in owning fewer, better things with the makers who made those things. We had sort of an ESG-centric standard that I developed with one of the leading experts in the fashion sustainability world to vet these garments. And we would run virtual pop-ups on Instagram to showcase women and people of all shapes and sizes to run these virtual events and connect women with the responsible brands that we had sourced. I made the decision in 2020 to the strategic decision to close that business because I struggled to reconcile the economic demands of running a business with increasing stakeholder demand around social and environmental considerations. And I have spent the last couple of years really digging into and learning about and speaking to thought leaders in the business and consulting spaces, and also in the spaces of ESG and business ethics to identify a better way forward in terms of trying to reconcile these things that can often feel like they are in tension. And so now I run my own consulting firm, helping leaders and companies navigate what I see as a new and very challenging environment when it comes to navigating the potential tension, what can sometimes feel like a tension between business and ethics, or ESG and anti-ESG, or woke and anti-woke. And I am in that space helping people navigate these challenging things with respect. And I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, I can go next. My name's Mary Worrell, and I'm the Director of Collections at the Michigan State University Museum. In this role, what I do is I oversee the care, preservation, activation, and risk management of the museum's collections. And we collect broadly in 3 areas, cultural, natural science, and archaeology. Prior to my current role, I was a curator for many, many years. Most recently, my focus was as curator of textiles and social justice, which meant I could bring together my love and academic background in art, in history, in apparel and textiles from the textile end, but also my interest in how museums can and should address social justice issues in what they do. And at times, my favorite projects were the things where I could use textiles to explore social justice issues. So this topic of sustainable fashion is really close to me for some of that work that I've done. One of my areas of interest in that work is thinking about the connections between fashion and nature. It brings together interdisciplinary work, but I really like to think about that fashion nature role and how they work together as inspiration, the impact they have, and to think about innovation in how they work together.
Hi, I'll follow up. My name is Katie Deska, and I work at Michigan State University as well. I'm a staff member at the Surplus Store and Recycling Center, and I focus on education and outreach, and particularly focusing on the Spartan Upcycle program, which is the creative reuse branch of our department. So because we service campus in terms of waste hauling, that means that we collect basically everything that the campus is discarding from, whether it's trash, recycling, items that could be reused, or some of the harder to recycle items like electronics. We also assist during campus move out from the residence halls. And it's during that time coming up here quickly, just in a couple of weeks in May, that we receive a large portion of our inventory that stocks the MSU surplus store. And, a piece of that is textiles and clothing. So we have a kind of an excess, like many, secondhand places do. And we are kind of looking for ways to both get folks involved, get students specifically involved in our operations and like the creativity side of things, seeing what can be possible with items that, have been discarded. And also just showing people that there's items of value that, are available secondhand right here on campus. So through Spartan Upcycle, I use the events like swaps and whatnot to bring people together. And I think it's a good opportunity to get students involved in the broader aspects around like waste and sustainability, because it's of interest. I think it has to do a lot with current things that are popular right now in the DIY movement. So that's a little bit more about what I do. Thanks.
I can follow that. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate. I actually am a student here at MSU. I'm currently a junior. As Hiba said, I am double majoring in business management and apparel and textile design. I am currently assistant creative director of VIM Magazine, which is our campus's beauty and fashion publication. And I also serve as co-president of MSU's Fashion Design Student Association. I'm part of the Honors College. I enjoy sewing and designing fashion shows in my free time. This Sunday, I will be opening for the Evening Wear Show in Chicago Fashion Week, which I'm very excited about. And I was lucky enough to recently win a design competition where I got to go to New York Fashion Week, which I will be speaking about today. So thank you so much for having me. You all have been so wonderful in this whole process, and I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you, everyone. I'm glad you're as excited as we are to have you here today. So, as you guys all mentioned, you come from very diverse backgrounds and fields, but a very common interest between all of you is fashion and sustainability. So I'd like to start off with that. Mary, could you tell us a little bit more about some examples of sustainable fashion that you've seen, such as the earth-friendly textile designs you were mentioning a little earlier?
Sure. So when I was thinking about this question, I was kind of dividing it into several areas of things that I think are important to think about. One is just thinking about materials in general and the production process, what that impact is on the earth when things are being made, water use, pollution, and so forth. And then the long-term effects of the materials on our world. For example, since I work so much with historical garments, polyester and condition of garments, when I look at garments from the 1800s, sometimes the condition of the garment is such an issue because natural fibers were made and they degrade over time. But when I get to the 1970s and so many polyester garments appear, everything's in great condition. But is that a good thing? As a museum person, I like to see things in good condition, but I think about what is that impact of all of that on the earth over time. So that's one area that I think about. Another is reuse and mending, how we can reimagine garments, how we can look at garments to look at inspiration from the past, to think about how to do that. The mending of garments, we don't always mend today. People mended garments in the past more frequently. And then just the whole role of thrifting and trading garments with one another. I also, with the materials thing, really like to think about new fibers that are being used, how things are being reused to create new fibers. And the other broad kind of area that I like to think about when I'm considering sustainable fashion is the workers, because I think they're such an important piece of this. Again, I always tend to drop back into history because that's just the world I come from, is think about cotton and all of the horrific treatment of the people involved in cotton production in the history of the US. We get to another period in time and we think of mill girls, and they had really detrimental things happening to their health because of the processes involved in creation of fabric in the 1800s. Workers, we had the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory where a lot of people were killed in a fire that was related to textile production. And even recently in Bangladesh, there was the Rana Tower collapse that's been in the news again a lot this week, I think, because it's the anniversary of that event. So all of the ways that the treatment of workers in the past and the present play a role in how we think of what's sustainable. The people are a part of that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mary. That was a great answer. Very, very interesting. On a very similar note, Katie, could you talk about your experience with the surplus store? I know Mary talked about reusing, recycling, and thrifting. So from your standpoint, can you talk about some events that you guys host, such as the Spartan Clothing Swap and the Clothing Repairathon?
Sure. Yeah, so we at the surplus store receive on average in a year about 20,000 to 25,000 pounds of clothing that comes from the residence halls, mostly what has been left behind from students who are moving out, whether they can't take it with them because they're moving and they don't have the ability to truck that stuff wherever, or things that they just don't want or need any longer. So that material that we receive is available for resale in the surplus store. In the past, we had been just donating that directly to a charity such as Goodwill, but we then were able to start to resell that right in our own store. And that allows us to generate, just enough revenue to cover the costs of the intake and the processing, along with that goes with the collection, and then also helping to provide some funds for education programming within the rest of our operations. So the clothes that we receive really give us something to work with in terms of getting the clothing swap started. So clothing swap, if anyone's not familiar, is when you kind of get people together and each other. You'll exchange clothing with each other. So somebody will bring a couple pieces, somebody else will bring, another, maybe a basket full, maybe a bag full, and then you'll have, things laid out on a table or, hanging up, and then you can just kind of free cycle, which is, when we are able to, keep things in use without having any, a few what we call hampers, which are basically large bins full of the clothes that we haven't sold in the store. And those serve to kind of get that swap pile started. And so it's something that helps people come who might not have anything to donate per se, but they maybe are looking for some secondhand items. And it gives us a chance to keep those items in use, because what happens with the clothing that we receive is about 60% of it is sold. And then there's another portion of it that about 30% or so that we have to look elsewhere for. So we will put that on sale. We'll do by the pound sales, about $1 a pound 1 week. And then we drop that down and we charge 50 cents a pound for the clothing the following week. And after that, after those 2 chances, then it can go to Smart and Upcycle, where then we can use it in the clothing swaps. Like we just had one on Earth Day. And so those seem to bring in students and community members who are just kind of intrigued by, oh, it's, they're free things, but it's for us also a chance to kind of help normalize wearing secondhand and normalize having swaps and sharing these, different methods of mending. Like Mary said, a lot of us didn't grow up learning how to sew or mend or really know anything about how to operate a sewing machine. So at the Repairathon at the MSU library with the MSU Makerspace, we have volunteers who are there to kind of offer assistance. And then same with at our swap and stitch event that we held that we'll do again later on in the fall. We partner with another organization in Lansing who has some extra machines, and then that is a chance for people to learn how to operate the machine or do some hand sewing or just see a little bit more about like what are these different ways of mending and what is this thing called visible mending and why is it kind of like, what's the kind of interest behind that? And so yeah.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was wonderful. I know I've always seen, advertisements in the posts about those events, and it really is a great community event. I see such a big turnout, which is amazing. Segueing to more of a business aspect, I'd like to ask Morgan about a foundation that she used to lead called The Garments. If you could talk a little bit about that and how you incorporate more sustainable practices into business models.
Sure. Thanks so much for the question. And it's actually interesting, Katie, hearing you talk about, you and Mary talk about mending. I actually started The Garment after I had my second daughter. So I have 2 daughters who are 10 and 7. And after I had my second daughter, I took a sewing class and went through the process of making a little dress for her. And I had never sewn before and really had never thought at all, to be honest, about what went into the making of a garment. And through that experience of choosing the pattern and tracing it out and cutting the fabric and sewing it, I had the experience of being connected to my clothing in a way that I never had before. And it was just had a real impact on me. And at the same time, I had this, little baby, and I was trying to find connection and reconnect with, who I was as a woman and a mom. And I found myself often going to the mall to buy things that made me feel shiny and stylish, but yet also had the experience of realizing that I had all these clothes in my closet, most of which were fast fashion, none of which were particularly great quality, none of which would I say really reflected like my true style. And basically I went through the process of realizing that I wanted to own fewer, better things, kind of like the dress I had made for my daughter. And so that's what was kind of the impetus of The Garment, was realizing that there were all of these makers out in the world who were crafting these fewer, better things. And I began the search of trying to find those garments. And then because of my background in business ethics and ethics more generally, I had at least a good enough starting foundation to know what to look for when it kind of came to how these garments were made. And that ended up becoming what we called the garment standard, which was a standard that we would use to assess these garments that we would then connect to our community members. And so basically, one of the things that I have learned and think is really foundational in terms of helping consumers and businesses navigate this sort of new era of ethics and sustainability. And I talk about this, I give a TED talk called Becoming as Ethical as We Think We Are. And basically realizing that from the perspective of behavioral ethics, we as business people and as consumers often think that we're better than we are when it comes to acting ethically or purchasing ethically or making our businesses more sustainable. And we have an opportunity to learn what that looks like in terms of sort of catching ourselves where we might be inadvertently overstating what we're doing, and take instead a step of action in terms of lining up our behavior more consistently with the sort of ethical consumers or ethical business people we want to become. And so I do a lot of work teaching business leaders and mostly business leaders and organizations about behavioral ethics, so that we can learn these concepts and actually catch ourselves when we're about to engage in something that might not line up with our ethics, and then better align our communication about what we're doing from a sustainability and ethics perspective, so that we're less at risk of overstating what we do, and we can have greater integrity from a business perspective, and which I believe contributes to more trust with our stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Morgan. That was a wonderful answer. Like you said, that emotional connection sometimes we have to our garments. I really related to that, and I think a lot of people do. And I'm sure Kate can talk a little bit about that. She talked a little bit about her experience making a gown that brought her to New York Fashion Week. So if you'd like to speak about that, please tell us, how was it?
Yeah, so that was incredible. It was way beyond what I expected it to be. I was on cloud nine the entire time, but to kind of give some insight of how I got there, there was an email that went out to the entire apparel and textile department inviting everyone to participate in this petition. The timing was very quick. We had about 2 weeks to create and submit a garment and an essay, and there were all these parameters that we were to follow. We were not allowed to use fabric, and it had to reflect the MSU brand in some way. So the logos, our school colors, something along those lines. And we had to submit that. So I wasn't even going to enter at first because I thought there's no way I'm going to be able to finish this in this time. And I ended up deciding to throw my hat in the ring just to give it a try because it sounded like too good of an opportunity to pass up. So I decided to create with paper. I thought that was the next easiest thing to work with next to fabric out of materials. And also it was very attractive to me that it could be recycled afterwards. Sometimes it's hard when you create a garment and you don't know what to do with it. And I knew if I wouldn't be able to make it out of fabric, I wouldn't be able to wear it or do anything with it. So making it out of paper would allow me to recycle it afterwards and not feel bad about creating a lot of waste. So the element that I chose to base the garment off of, the aspect of the MSU brand that I chose, was our campus. I think our campus brings all of us together. We're connected to it as students. It connects us to each other. It's just a very special part of what makes our school our school. So I wanted to highlight that. And one of my favorite places on campus is Beaumont Tower. And in the spring, there are all these cherry blossom trees that open up, and it's really beautiful. So I kind of did an homage to that. I created a dress inspired by those cherry blossom trees. So creating it out of paper was actually simpler. I had a really, I really connected with using paper as a medium, and I really enjoyed it. So I rushed home on the weekend. I bought myself a big roll of paper and I went to town and I just created this dress. I had a lot of fun doing it. And I only bought one roll of paper in one shade of pink. I ended up bleach dyeing it to create the gradients for different colors. And I was really fortunate enough to win that competition and go to New York, be able to network with industry professionals, learn about their design processes, understand what was going on in the fashion industry in New York, and just the industry, what it looked like in that city. So that was a really rewarding experience for me.
I'm so glad to hear that. That sounds amazing. I'm so happy for you. I can't imagine
Thank
how
you.
amazing that experience must have been, and I'm sure that dress was beautiful.
Thank you.
On a similar note, I'd like to move on to Kathleen Grievers now, who talked a little bit about Fashion Revolution Week. Could you tell us about that, please?
Sure. Yeah, Katie, I'd love to see the pictures of your dress. It sounds amazing. So Fashion Revolution, as kind of was mentioned about all the different issues with factory fires, right? That Triangle Shirtwaist Factory and the Rana Plaza, which was a huge building in Bangladesh, had structural issues. And they knew it had structural issues, but there was such a pressure from large brands who have there's a whole list of who was in the building, what brands were there. There was such a pressure for these garments to be made. And as it's already been discussed, making a garment is a hard work. It is not easy. So they didn't release any of the employees. And when the building started to collapse, the exit doors were locked, so the employees couldn't leave. And we lost 1,100 people and 2,500 people were injured. So that was 10 years ago yesterday. And two designers, Ursula de Castro and Carrie Summers, from that day on started Fashion Revolution. And they started to bring the awareness to what's happening in the fashion industry. And this awareness is now gone into 82 countries. So I work at a level with Fashion Revolution, with Fashion Revolution Kazakhstan, Fashion Revolution Greece, Fashion Revolution Zimbabwe. And I work with all of these different countries to help understand how do we bring the awareness of what the fashion industry is. Now, this is an education platform, meaning that we're not out to bash brands. We're not saying Nike's bad and Adidas is bad and all of these. We're saying we need to change the way government legislation is, and we need to be able to show and help students also be able to make the change on their campuses on how to make things better in the fashion industry. So Fashion Revolution Week started because in solidarity to what happened with Rana Plaza 10 years ago yesterday. And for the last 9 years, we've been doing Fashion Revolution Week. So the anniversary of Fashion Revolution doesn't happen until next year. And what Fashion Revolution Week is 75 countries running events, clothing swaps, panel events, marches on government property to try to change legislation. All these things happen during this week. And I'll put in the chat room, even in the US, because I'm leadership for the US and we've built in this whole week of power brokers. So if you know the names like Aditi Meyer, Elizabeth Klein, these are all people that are friends of Fashion Revolution and they speak on these panels. So you can really dive in to understand what's current. So Fashion Revolution goes through all the different countries. Every country has a different type of event, because you think of like Fashion Revolution Turkey is dealing with more textile waste issues. Fashion Revolution US is dealing with more garment worker issues. And then we have even the whole EU section, which Italy, Slovakia, all of the EU countries are dealing with parliament and EU issues. So there's, depending on where you're from, even what your heritage is, even if you have any connection with other countries, you can go on Instagram, you can go on Facebook or LinkedIn, and each country has their own, segment of Fashion Revolution that you can get very connected to. I work with a lot of students who, one student wanted to visit France. So we got them teamed up with Fashion Revolution France coordinators, and that student was able to do almost her own little study abroad through Fashion Revolution. So there's a lot of avenues that happen, and a lot of it starts with this week, with this Fashion Revolution Week. So I'll put more links in later on, but it's a pretty remarkable time. It's also a little bit exhausting, but it's for the awareness. We're trying to bring more education. So that's basically about Fashion Revolution Week.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. That sounds amazing. It's such an important issue, and I'm glad that you're working hard to address that and bring that more into the spotlight, because it is definitely something that people tend to hide behind. On a similar note, you did mention how you help out some students. So another common theme that we like to mention today is getting the youth more involved for like the future generation. So I know you lead the Student Ambassador Program. So could you tell a little bit about that?
Sure. Ambassador Program, and luckily we've been able to get a lot of research from other students on how to run ambassador programs, and then I help train other countries on running ambassador programs, because volunteerism in different countries is very different. It's not the same as the US. Service learning is not a thing in Turkey or Slovakia. So we try to run it through their cultural crossovers and make it work. But in the US, we have a really strong Fashion Revolution Ambassador Program, and it's not just for students, it's for anyone basically under the age of 30. That's our demographic for it. And what we do is we have monthly meetings. Our next meeting is about fashion policy jobs. So we're talking about when we're talking about social justice, sometimes it's not enough to just have an Instagram post like this is what you believe. Sometimes you really want to walk the walk and be, on Capitol Hill. And our board of directors, our chair is one of the fashion lobbyists for the industry. So we're really excited that we have her as our chair of the Fashion Revolution USA team. And we're able to give, different types of education options that some schools can't give because of whatever didactic they're working with. Right now, we're running a sustainable data for fashion industry through Glasgow Caledonian, which is an open certificate program, and it allows people to understand, all right, when someone says it takes, 2 tons of water to make a pair of jeans, where is that cited data coming from? And from an academic standpoint, you can't say those things unless you have it cited. And a lot of the things that we're trying to clean up is also the language that we use. So we're asking students to, in our ambassador program, to dive more deeply into what they're quoting and what they're saying, and then teaching them, how do you find that data? So in many aspects, our students get the international scope, because I'm also very headstrong in international relations. So the international scope, the connections with other countries, the connections with, other communities. So we have a New England chapter. We have our Michigan chapter is really great. It's very strong, especially in Detroit. We partner a lot with Isaac in Detroit. And California is very strong for legislation. So our ambassador program, it kind of ebb and flows to whatever we want to cover, because we have that breadth to be able to say and dive into different subjects. And it's also led to a lot of internships. It's also led to a lot of jobs. And these are all people that are just curious, people from, Ivy League to community college, and it shifts every year. So that's pretty much the ambassador program. It's open-ended. It's a matter of filling out a Google form, and then our ambassador team takes over and kind of guides the person into understanding different meeting times and really what they want to get out of it.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I'm glad to hear that it's doing so well and that you have such success with the program so far, and I hope continues. On a similar note, I'd like to ask Mary, with her background in MSU Museum and as a curator, do you have any recommendations or advice for youth in terms of building a more sustainable future?
Sure. So first, I just want to mention how exciting I find it, the interest of youth in sustainable fashion. And I find it really encouraging that so many people are interested in making it a part of their everyday practice and in thinking about sustainability issues in what they're studying and what future career goals might be. Some of my broad advice plays off of things that people have mentioned already today. I think it's really important to think about the impact of what you're doing in your everyday practice, the choices you make, fast fashion versus the impact of maybe paying a little bit more for something that's more sustainable, but you're going to get more wares per dollar type of thing out of it. Thinking about reuse, there's been so many great comments on reuse already today. I think it's really important for young people to do their research. There's to know about the brands that you are supporting. I get so many emails, et cetera, like everybody else does, that talk about different things that different companies are doing with materials and practice. And I think it's really important to do a little bit of follow-up to make sure that that's not just a marketing greenwashing effort, that you really are looking into those practices and supporting people that are making what I would call good choices. I also, with youth, I like to think about the possibility for innovation and what you might do to be innovative in this realm. Whatever type of field you're pursuing, if it's a more technology based, is there some sort of innovation in manufacturing and materials that you may play a part of? Is innovation some new practice that you're going to put out into the world? There's all of these things that I think young people can think about as they're making, again, everyday choices and thinking about study and career.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you so much, Mary. On a similar note, Katie, I'm sure you've seen working with the MSU community and your target audience mostly being college students. How do you get more involved with the younger population and having them, gain more of an interest in sustainability?
Good question. And it's something that, I'm constantly trying to figure out, the answer to. But I think that what Mary talked about in terms of like looking at what kind of innovations are currently being talked about in the news and kind of finding out a little bit more like deeper than just, the first paragraph of the story, like what kind of buy-in do they have? What sort of what's the economy of scale to make that innovation like possible to be, to take off? And I think that one of the things that we try to convey at Surplus and Recycling through the education that we do and is the importance of waste prevention versus turning around and just focusing on the recycling end of it. Yes, recycling is very important, but when it comes to textiles, it's a challenge just as it is to recycle things like plastic. So I would encourage people to explore the avenues of reuse and upcycling before focusing in on like recycling technologies. And I guess in terms of the difference between reuse and upcycling, what we kind of look at it as is reuse means more along the lines of conventional or like what the item already is. So say it's like a pair of jeans. So maybe turning those pair of jeans into, maybe it's becoming like maybe just a bag, or it could even be turning that material into insulation. So you're still using it as it is. And then upcycling, would be how can you take something that's a waste material and then, adding value to that. So that might be some of the scrap material that's left behind in industrial, manufacturing. So kind of looking at both the pre-consumer side of things, so during when manufacturing is happening, and post-consumer, kind of looking at where are the opportunities to, to source resources from. So can you, find available resources in ways that, are not really thought about yet? So what ways can we make available these resources that are really the crux of it, because if we don't focus more on reuse, we're going to continue, to face an uphill battle of, increased waste. And, talking about, the data that we've learned, when I took a certification for a true waste advisor, I learned that generally speaking, about for every 1 pound of waste that's generated downstream, like down at the consumer level, there's about 70 pounds of waste generated upstream. And so the same, that holds true for fashion. So we really have to look at all of the waste that's being generated upstream, like was talked about before, in these areas that we might not think about every day when we just are focused on how do we, keep our garment out of the landfill here. We have to think beyond just that, and consider the life cycle of that material and that garment previous to when it reached our hands. And I guess one other thing would just be to focus more on the reuse aspect of materials that could be maybe harder to recycle. So for instance, if things are of a blended material, it's going to be more difficult to recycle those. So if it's like cotton or polyester blend, so kind of looking at how can we even create some standards around, like somebody mentioned, regulation, or just standards among the business world of, okay, we are going to try to minimize the variety of chemicals used to create different different qualities, right? Whether it's like waterproofing or anti-wrinkle or something like that. Like how can we kind of minimize the variance within the material that we're creating, so that when those recycling technologies do advance and we are able to make more headway there, then we're not creating additional work for ourselves down the line.
Thank you so much for that, Katie. It definitely puts things into perspective, thinking of the whole process from start to finish, and the upstream and downstream effects, like you said. Similarly, Kate, as a student MSU and a member of the VIM student organization, how do you see that organization promoting sustainable fashion?
Sure. Also, as a side note, I do have pictures of the dress if you wanted me to share my screen at some point. If not, no worries. But VIM, like I said before, is a very large student organization. We mainly focus on our fashion publication. So we produce a fall issue and a spring issue and pass out the magazines for free on campus. But we also do a lot of fashion events and events around sustainability. So in that realm, we do a lot of clothing swap events. I know clothing swap was previously mentioned, and VIM has events every year where we all bring clothes and swap with each other. We hold thrifting events as well. A lot of our members are very interested in upcycling and thrifting and sewing, so we promote that and support that in a lot of our events. We also collaborate with individuals working to promote sustainable fashion. Last week, we just had a speaker, the CEO of Nextiles. It is a fabric recycling company in Detroit, and we tried to educate our members on recycling options, sustainability options, who are the leaders in those industries, and just promoting awareness on that. So that was really interesting to learn about. And also our members are constantly passing along sustainability initiatives that we hear about. Just yesterday, a member was promoting taking in recycled fabric. There's a new club starting at a local middle school, and they're accepting reused fabric or sewing machines because they're learning how to sew. So we try to help where we can in the local community while bringing awareness with others who are working on those initiatives in our meetings. So we highlight speakers, hold events, and try our best.
No, that sounds amazing. I'm glad you're not only focusing only on the MSU community, but also our East Lansing and our local community as well. That's really important as well. On a similar note, moving on to Morgan, as you work with more businesses, how do you guide those younger businesses in promoting ethical management and sustainability?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. So I think one of the most important things that I focus on helping businesses and leaders when it comes to navigating some of these tensions is realizing kind of what I talked about before about this idea that we're not as ethical as we think we are. And even though some people kind of reel back a little bit when I say that, the really fascinating thing is when we understand that, we have a better opportunity for greater integrity, greater impact, greater action, because we can kind of catch ourselves. And there have been a number of people on the panel who've kind of talked about this tendency to greenwash, or to even as consumers accept things that brands say that might not be true. And in my experience, people don't often do that, and brands even, really on purpose. It's really that because of all of the things about our human mind, because of motivated blindness and our bias in certain directions, we will tend to not see things that are inconsistent with what we want, with what our self-interest wants. And if we understand that, we have a significant opportunity to kind of catch ourselves and backtrack and make a more thoughtful decision. So a lot of what I do is teach people and leaders these concepts so that we can have greater alignment between what we say our brand is about and what we say we care about as consumers and what we're actually doing. And I think it was Kathleen who just made the point that, you know, an Instagram post isn't enough. And I think that is, you know, I teach a course on risk and reputation in the era of shares and likes. And we see a lot of this where even as individuals, we have our own brands now, many of us on social media, and even posting something to do with FashRev, for example, sort of sets up an expectation on the part of our people that we are going to align our actions with what we've said we care about. And I believe there's a really significant opportunity to help people have a greater understanding about that relationship, particularly for brands, so that when we make sure that if we're about to come out and say we care about something when it comes to sustainable fashion, or make a commitment or make a statement, that we have very clearly thought through what that looks like from an operational perspective, driven it down throughout our organization, and only then do we come out and articulate it, because then we can back it up. And so I realize that there is a tension in this in many ways, because of course, you know, sharing a post about FashRev, for example, is important, and I used to do this all the time with the garment to our followers. And so I acknowledge that it's not perfect, but I do think there's a really significant opportunity to decrease virtue signaling, decrease moral grandstanding, decrease, you know, harping on big brands, and instead drive to action. And so I think that that is the biggest opportunity that young people and that businesses have in this space.
Thank you so much for that, Morgan. That was a great answer. Like you said, I think awareness is so important, both from the consumer side and from the business side. It really does go both ways. Moving on, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the future of this industry and how each of you see sustainable fashion growing and improving. So, Kate, if you'd like to talk about your opinion, where do you see the future of sustainable fashion going?
That's a really interesting question. Our generation, I think there's a big divide in our generation, which is really interesting. I think half of us are very in tune with sustainability, very interested in thrifting, very aware of it. And the other half is very wasteful in fast fashion, constantly buying new things off of Amazon and Shein because they're so cheap and affordable, and doing clothing hauls and buying new things all the time. So I think half of us are combating the problem and half of us are contributing to it. So that's really interesting because I don't know which side is going to win in the future. I think there's some really interesting technology being developed. I think recycling fabric is increasingly becoming a process that we might be able to rely on. I'm seeing some new technology. We just spoke, like I said, with the CEO of Nextiles, and they were talking about processing fabric to be recycled into new fabric and then being able to be sold, which is really exciting. There's a lot of innovative fabrics being created from recycled materials. There are always better processes being developed. but we are also seeing this big push in fast fashion and waste, and people buying clothes just for an event or just for a season, not wearing them again, selling them. I think TikTok promotes a culture of consumerism and always wanting more to buy more. People are always pushing out these products that they've just bought and other people want them. And that's not only in fashion, that's also in beauty and random products like coffee and mugs and whatever you can think of. There's just this want for more all the time. So I think we need to really address slowing down and that culture of consumerism and constantly wanting more for us to really move forward and people to recognize the impact that fast fashion is having on our environment, because I think that's the biggest issue in the fashion industry right now is fast fashion. And that is so difficult because especially as college students, it's so affordable. It's always on trend. There's always new pieces coming out. It's so hard to ignore or not buy into that. So I think in the future, hopefully we will recognize that it's time to slow down. And Morgan has talked a lot about buying fewer, better things. I think that is half of us are going in that direction, and hopefully we can continue to move in that direction. I think we're on the right path with awareness. So hopefully the technologies that are being developed in partnership with our generation, putting a focus on sustainability, we will finally be able to reverse some of the damage that we've done.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. I agree with you completely. You definitely see with the rise of social media that those trends are cycling so much faster than they used to. So it is a little bit terrifying to see in that sense how much consumerism has taken over our daily lives. You did mention technologies and innovations that you hope to see. Mary, I'd like to ask you if there are any innovations or technologies that you know of that would hold promise for advancing sustainability in the fashion industry.
I'm just gonna follow up and expand a little bit more on materials and thinking about materials. That's one aspect that I'm really intrigued with. I'm especially intrigued right now with because of my interest in nature meeting fashion, the use of mushrooms to create fibers, and mushroom as like a faux leather material. I'm really interested to see where that specifically goes. Part of that or any other new innovation or technology, I think, is thinking about the long view. Is it something that becomes accessible to many people, or is it something that only stays with a certain 1% type of accessibility? And then when these new materials are created, what are the long-term effects on the environment, on the production, on everything else? So I am really intrigued with new fabrics and what's being created, but again, taking the long view on them as a part of that.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. That was great. Definitely seeing those more sustainable methods of creating fabrics is very interesting to see, and like that creative aspect plays such a big role for real. For the next question, I'd like to ask Katie how you have seen the Spartan Surplus store grow over the years, and if you guys have any goals for the future.
Sure. Yeah, I think that we have actually been surprised that the amount of clothes that come to us at the end of the year during the student move out from the residence halls has stayed more or less consistent from what I understand. And I think that the biggest thing I think for us that we are looking at is how can we get more of that material being reused right within the MSU community. So one thing that we're looking forward to for next year is establishing a voucher program where we're able to offer vouchers to some student groups who then can give the vouchers to the members, and then the members can come in and do shopping right there at the store, as opposed to more of the like traditional kind of donation of the items to to the, maybe to the group, and then they can kind of sift through. This way they can come into the store with a voucher and, shop, occasionally and see what, what they might want to leave with. So then hopefully they'll end up with something that they like and maybe that they can keep more, for a longer time. And I think the other main thing is to try to encourage awareness around the surplus store, so that we can, kind of connect with students when they are just kind of coming onto campus, and among, the community to, show that, this is a thrift store that you can use. You can also donate to us, and kind of help lift the, narrative around other areas where you can do secondhand purchasing. So whether or not we share resources to students who, want to find, how do they buy secondhand online, or how do they sell their own clothes, or how can we help connect them, with somebody who they could maybe, learn from in terms of a business perspective. So like kind of what Kate was saying, I think it would be great if we could bring in more speakers who are, active in this space right now, and, help students kind of hear from the people who are doing the work and learn from their, their experiences. I think the other main thing that we are going to continue to focus on is to drill down on the importance of waste prevention and reduction of purchasing and reduction of, extraction and manufacturing. And that's a tough one, because that really gets to the heart of, like, who we are as people and how we operate in the world in terms of our economic system and our social kind of understanding of, meaning. We get a lot of meaning from our clothes and from the way that, we see each other and see ourselves reflected. And so we really have to challenge some of these, like, deep, like, I don't know, perspectives. So I hope that we're able to continue to encourage students to come on out and just explore and learn. And it's not about changing something overnight, but just making little changes here and there, and then making those things that, you can, enjoy with your friends, like what Kate said, like going thrifting, or finding the ways to, make it something that you enjoy and not a pain to try to act in more of a sustainable, way with your daily life.
Thank you, Katie. That was great. Definitely making it something that's enjoyable and, a very creative process is what I think will bring in a lot more people. On a similar note of growth, I wanted to ask Kathleen, where do you see your program going 5 years from now?
Well, I have to, mention what Katie said is really important to note that, and I think Morgan, you touched on it too, that people come to fashion at different places, and we throw a lot at people to, be so conscious, and we have to give everybody the ability to do this on their own terms. Because the person who may think, H&M is fast fashion is the other person who thinks it's luxury. And, and I know I'm speaking from a global point of view, where H&M is a luxury brand in countries like Slovakia and Poland. It's luxury. So I think we have to be respectful more about that, and understand, like, yeah, TikTok and all the overhauls, I mean, that's just a disaster. But there's the other pieces that Katie was also kind of leaning towards when she was mentioning almost like the mindfulness of where everybody else is coming at this fashion sustainability issue. I was on a talk yesterday. It was a more like global talk. And one of my colleagues even said, how can someone why would we want to own more than 3 pairs of shoes? And I'm like, you know what? I'm a middle-aged woman, and I've gone through every body type, and my body changes, and you want things to feel good. You want to feel good. So yeah, we're going to consume footwear. We're going to consume clothing. I mean, we're all women here, and your body changes constantly, especially after having children and everything else that life throws at you. So I think a mindfulness on how we share things is really important. And I think this panel is really good at that. And Morgan, you're exceptional at it. So we have a lot to learn from you too. And a lot of what we're doing in Fashion Revolution is legislation. And in 5 years, I hope that we have passed legislation for the Garment Workers Center, the Fashion Act, the Fabric Act. The Fabric Act is a national U.S. federal legislation that's going in front of Congress in May. And we've worked really hard to get that to protect our garment workers. The Fashion Act is a New York legislation. So I could see Fashion Revolution more deeply working on government legislation and continuing on, the activism role of, Instagram and sharing posts and all of those things. But I think there's a deeper root that we need to shift. And the other piece of it is I am working really hard at helping universities, helping HBCUs, helping community colleges get programs that they may not have funding to be able to do, or they're, may not even have like the ability of faculty to be able to teach them. So I'm trying to get more support there for fashion programming. We have a free online course right now called Who Made My Clothes? And then, the other certificate programs I've already mentioned. I work with universities in many different levels, including, experiential learning programs, like how do we do student exchanges between Fashion Revolution countries? And how does that help the community that they go to? So I think there's a way that Fashion Revolution can get legislation and can get more education for schools.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. That was a great answer. Definitely. I'm glad you mentioned mindfulness because that really does play a big role. And definitely those small acts, whether it's an individual level or like the legislation level, is very, very important. So I think everyone has a role in being involved. You mentioned a lot about Morgan and amazing work she does. So I wanted to ask her what she sees or what she hopes to see in the future in terms of ethical and sustainable businesses.
Thank you so much for the question. And I'm going to be honest, I went through a pretty long period of being not very hopeful about the future of sustainable fashion. And the reality is, I was very much in this space of like business and ethics, like coming together with the garment, really working hard to build a brand that was sort of equally on both sides of the self-interest and ethics equation. We generated over $1 million in ethical garment sales in our first corporate year, leveraging just Instagram as a platform. And the reality is I found myself as a leader of that organization really, really challenged to navigate the public expectations of polarized stakeholders. And that was a space still within the ethical fashion space. So, Kate, you talked about just this idea of kind of two sides. And the idea like there are those of us who care and there are those of us who don't, or there are ethical fashion brands and they're not, fast fashion brands. And I believe, and I think you're very right. Like, I think that polarization, it exists at the business level when we're talking about like ESG, anti-ESG, woke, anti-woke. I think these are that's what I see as the biggest challenge in terms of where we're headed when it comes to sustainable fashion, and also the biggest opportunity. So I've come to believe that there is a very real, significant opportunity if we are able to understand the way in which we kind of become tribal when it comes to these things and like to believe that we're right, we're in the right camp. And if we can understand that and open our minds, we have a really significant opportunity to kind of cross the aisle, whether that's from the sustainable fashion perspective, to talk to the CEO and to equip him or her with the skills to listen to us. And I wanted to share this book is one of the best resources that I have found in terms of bridging that gap and creating an opportunity for better conversations. It's called I Never Thought of It That Way: How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. And it's by a woman named Monica Guzman, who is a self-described liberal, lives in the States. And she basically wrote the book because both of her parents, who are also immigrants, voted for Trump. And she found herself struggling with, how do I sit at the table with my parents when I disagree so significantly with them? And she just wrote this beautiful book that provides tools for engaging in conversation about some of these issues that can be really challenging to talk about. So I think that that's the biggest opportunity, is to move away from binary thinking when it comes to business and ethics and self-interest and morality, and realize that we are all human. We all have a limit. We like to think that we'll do X, and sometimes the practical realities of that are really challenging. And so I think understanding that this polarization exists, coming to a place of like respect for one another's opinions and perspective and where we're coming from, I believe that that's what's necessary for us to move like together in a better and more impactful direction.
That was an amazing answer, Morgan. Thank you so much. I'm glad you mentioned how daunting it can seem to tackle such a large scale issue like sustainable fashion, and how it is very polarized. But definitely having conversations like these, looking more at legislation and at research and innovations is what's going to help us reach that middle ground to hopefully come up with a better future for this industry. So I'd like to thank you guys all. One final question that I'd like everyone to answer is, how would you describe sustainable fashion to you and in your industry in 1 or 2 sentences? This is open to everyone, so whoever would like to start.
I can kick us off. To me, sustainable fashion is thinking about the product and thinking about the people. So there's 2 sides. There's how that product was sourced, the fabric you're using, the impact on the environment, but also sustainability in fashion has a huge human rights side to it. So it's, how are the people being treated who have made the garment? Are there fair conditions? Are they safe? Are they being paid enough? So to put it simply, it's the people and the product. Considering both sides, those both come together to create sustainable fashion.
I can jump in next. Thanks for that, Kate. I would say from my perspective, I tend to adopt sort of a lens around like economics as well. So from my perspective, one of the really critical considerations when we talk about sustainable fashion and companies that are moving more in this direction is ensuring that they have done the research and the work and the consultation with their stakeholders to ensure that the product that they are planning to create to make like better, if we want to say from a sustainability perspective or an inclusivity perspective, is something that their consumers and stakeholders are going to buy. Because there's this happened quite a lot recently, even some of the bigger brands that have been made sort of bigger moves towards size inclusivity, for example, without doing the work of fully understanding their stakeholders. And so I think that it's really critical that organizations kind of move together and consider both the economic and the ethical aspects of some of these decisions in order to make them viable over the long term.
I think my industry is museums. It's thinking about museums as this. What is the role of a museum in a community, and how it includes being a space for education and a space for having dialogues, and how museums can be spaces for sharing innovation and bringing people together to have conversations related to sustainable fashion.
I think that the first thing that popped in my mind when I thought of what makes for sustainable fashion is to consider like what the supply chain looks like. So looking at all the aspects that kind of like, you know, helped bring that product into being. But, you know, from the waste perspective, you know, and I guess along that same line of like kind of the life cycle of clothing would be to consider, you know, what is ends of life? What is the ability for it to be reused? How can this be moved back into the system after it's, you know, finished in this current state of, you know, purpose or whatever? So I guess I would say sustainable fashion is one that, you know, considers the, like was said, the environmental and social impacts, you know, throughout the supply chain, and makes choices that are, you know, in line with, you know, helping to, you know, keep a healthy, you know, people and healthy environment. And also, you know, at the end of the life cycle of that product, how is it going to be absorbed again into that cycle? So how do we keep it going round and round like that?
To me, it's about government, and it's about the international support that each country can bring, the awareness of it. I think that's the beginning piece of it, because there's nothing sustainable about any product. You know, the word sustainable doesn't even make sense to me anymore. But I think, you know, in that context, it's about the root of it. And I think each one of us on this panel has such a strong root in, you know, like the stakeholders of what we're working on in different capacities, that it's all so vital. So yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you, everyone. That was a great conclusion to the very insightful dialogue that we just had. I'd like to now move on to our Q&A session. So here we will open it up to our audience, our attendees. If they have any questions, they can use the raise hand feature on Zoom, and we can allow them the opportunity to unmute and ask that question, or the chat box is open if they'd like to type in any questions in there. And panelists, feel free also if you have questions for one another. Kate, if you'd like to share, start off by showing that picture of your dress, that would be amazing.
Sure. Share my screen. So
Wow,
here
that's
it is.
beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely gorgeous. If you'd like to talk a little bit more about it, like the process you made it, or
Sure. So, like I said, this was all just one roll of paper. The flowers I created, I cut them all into different petal shapes, and then I hand dipped them in like a bleach solution to create an ombre effect. The sleeves you see are tissue paper, so they're a little bit thinner to create more of a delicate effect. And I mostly did this by draping on the mannequin. So I created a pattern for the pants, but the top was draped. That was a really nice thing about the paper, was it was easily pleated, and you could make crisp folds and really stable designs. So I really enjoyed working with it, and it was a really fun process.
Congratulations, Kate. It is stunning.
Oh, thank you so much.
I love how big you made the flowers. Like you really used the material and made it do what it wanted to do. I think there's so much joy in this. It looks beautiful.
Thank you. I have a flair for the dramatic, so I kind of capitalized on that.
Kate, is this something that you're going to try to, you know, turn into another piece that is going to be, you know, more wearing friendly than paper, or are you going to just kind of like you'd like to leave it as this art piece as it is, and you know, it's statement piece as it is alone?
Actually, this did kind of lend itself to my most recent collection. So the dress that you saw has already been recycled. It's done its job, and I really didn't have anything else to do with it. But the collection that I've created, I showed it at Vim's Spring Fashion Show, and then I'm also showing it at Chicago Fashion Week. That is a pink and floral collection that really, I wasn't done with that look. So I did build into it with my collection. Yeah.
I was just going to say, too bad Mary didn't get her hands on that paper dress.
I know, I was going to
Yeah.
ask what happened to it.
I'm sorry. I've had people reach out to me, ask me about it, and I have to keep saying, I'm sorry, like I recycled it, which I regret now, but what's done is done.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kate. It truly was very, very gorgeous.
Oh, of
And
course, thank
the good
you.
side, you definitely got to show it off, but of course, like recycling it, we couldn't hold on to it as long as possible. But thank you for that. We do have a question in the chat. We have from Alexandra. She said, it was mentioned that some companies tend to greenwash their sustainability through strategic branding. From a consumer perspective, I see this frequently with nice sounding jargon and catchphrases on social media. So what are some practical ways an average consumer can distinguish between virtue signaling or marketing tactics versus true, meaningful steps a product or company is taking to be more ethical and sustainable? Are there common red flags? Or how do we know if they're walking the walk or just talking the talk?
I can take a start at this one if you'd like. One of the things, just to start, that I loved hearing about the work that Kathleen's doing is just around equipping students with the capacity, greater capacity for learning about the importance of like strong research and really understanding what goes into some of these, considerations around making statements when it comes to environmental or social impacts. So I think like that is a fantastic starting point, because I think, 20 years ago when I went to university, like that was not something that was being focused on or taught. So I think that from a just capacity building perspective is really important. And then from a consumer perspective, I think that one of the first and most important things to realize is kind of what I've touched on a little bit already, but is this idea that as consumers, our desire for things makes it really difficult for us to see when there's greenwashing or diversity washing or any of this happening, because we have basically the want part of ourselves and the should part of ourselves. And when we're anticipating something in advance, like, okay, I want to be an ethical consumer, we're connected with that should part of ourselves. But the research is very clear that when we see the cute thing, when our friend is buying the thing on Amazon, we're like, that's so cute and it's so on trend. It doesn't take much for us to see like one tiny little logo or anything indicating this is, fair trade or anything, recycled material, that will flip us over the edge to say like, yeah, this is okay. And so realizing that brands also understand this to varying degrees, but they oftentimes will have just little signals that if we're paying minimal attention, we will like follow that and just buy the cute thing because we really want it. So the greatest opportunity, I think, aside from doing one of Kathleen's programs and really understanding all of the kind of what to look for, is just having a greater understanding of like behavioral ethics and psychology, so that we have an opportunity to like snap ourselves out of that. And once we can move out of our want brain and into our more rational brain, we can look at our decision from a more thoughtful perspective. And it doesn't mean that we won't always like buy the cute thing, because we're humans and we have self-interest and we want the things, but we have a better chance of more closely aligning our behavior with the ethical consumers we want to be if we understand that that's what's going on.
Yeah, I'll follow up in that There's an app called Good on You, and even my own daughter who, you know, there's certain things that she loves to wear, and sometimes we don't find it in secondhand, or, you know, and I'm not a great sewer. I don't even like to sew. I like making shoes. So when we have something to repair, it's kind of difficult. I can repair little things, but to make a dress, kudos to all of you. So Good on You app is a good one if you just need that quick, okay, what is going on, and I can't look at all the, you know, greenwashing terms from the Federal Trade Commission. Just go on Good on You, and they have a good listing. The other thing I was going to say is look at where the clothing's made. You know, even if you just take some time, like, what does it mean when clothing is made in Korea versus Bangladesh versus Turkey versus, you know, in the US? Just get a little bit of an understanding of that, or go as deep as you want. Because even if you're looking on Amazon and you're like, oh, this is in Cambodia, maybe that doesn't line with your ethics, with your morals. So look at where the clothing is made. And then have the Good on You app for that quick, you know, need a reference. And then, yeah, don't beat yourself up for it, but think of it as, even when you click on the Amazon purchase, that you've just clicked on buying a puppy. It's the same thing. You're bringing a puppy home. Okay, so now you have this puppy. Now you have to take care of it. And if you don't want the puppy, you have to give it a new home ethically. So you kind of think about that too. So it's all these little pieces that can just help get past the greenwashing, and, you know, exactly what Morgan's saying too. So I hope that could help.
Thank you both. That was a great answer. If there's anyone else who would like to add on it, Alexandra, if you'd like to say something.
Oh, I was just gonna say thanks for the answers on that, and something that I heard too. I think my question was a little bit slanted towards almost how do we hold companies responsible for the marketing and things that they say, but your answers that were a little bit different, and it was kind of how do we hold ourselves responsible for what we're buying. And so thank you for that perspective.
On that note, real quick, one of the things that I've seen done with some sorts of like single-use plastic waste that's, you know, generated all over the world is people are taking like a photograph of themselves with that trash that they find, you know, in their, you know, river or whatever, and they're you know, actually tagging and, you know, hashtagging every the company, maybe the brand name, maybe it's, you know, its owner, and, you know, up and down to whoever's maybe funding it or whatever. So they try to draw attention to the brand itself, rather than you know, holding just kind of putting the blame on like whoever was just tossing that out, you know, didn't make it to its proper like disposal place. So I don't know how that is maybe for clothing, but that's kind of what made me think of it when you talked about how do you kind of hold them accountable. Is just, you know, it's like, how is their image going to be adversely affected if you find, when you do find out something that doesn't really align with what they have, you know, tried to put forth in their website maybe.
Thank you so much for that, Katie. I'd like to thank everyone again one more time for such an insightful and very important conversation. It was truly amazing to hear from all of you guys individually and bouncing off of each other. So that ends the discussion part, and I'd like to hand it over to Rebecca, who is the director of the Canadian Studies program, to close the event.
Greetings, everyone. What an amazing panel of speakers. I'm so impressed by both the small and large actions that each panelist is taking to address such an important issue. I'm Dr. Rebecca Mallowan, and I serve as director of the Canadian Studies Center, who is a co-sponsor of this event. And I also serve as director of the MSU Global Health Studies graduate program here. As a global health professional, I've witnessed the impact of fast fashion in countries such as Niger, where I served as a Peace Corps volunteer, and Ghana and Malawi, where I've worked more recently. 70% of secondhand clothing globally ends up in the continent of Africa. The dead man's market can be found in most mid-sized towns across Africa. In Ghana, for example, for example, where I'll be traveling with MSU students in 3 weeks to study culture, health, and healthcare. Over 15 million used garments enter Accra, the capital, weekly. These garments come from the UK, Europe, North America, and Australia. 40% are not usable and go directly into the landfill. The East African Community, a regional economic group, agreed in 2016 to a complete ban on used clothing imports by 2019. However, the ban has not yet been implemented for a variety of reasons. Instead, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda have raised taxes on secondhand clothing imports and are providing incentives to local textile and clothing manufacturers. This is a local and global issue, and this is an individual and collective issue. I'm heartened to hear of the important work out of Canada led by Morgan through initiatives such as the Garments to embrace and promote ethical management and sustainability within the fashion business. Kathleen, through Fashion Revolution Week, is challenging the status quo in the fashion industry by creating a grassroots revolution, including consumer education and policy change. I hope that you will all explore the Student Ambassador Program as part of the Fashion Revolution Week if you have an interest in addressing the issues raised today. MSU as an educational institution is a global leader in sustainable development. MSU ranked 33rd in the world in the Times Higher Education Global Impact Rating related to sustainable development goals last year. It's exciting to see how academic departments such as Mary's, units such as the surplus store and recycling where Katie is located, and student groups and students such as Kate are leading the charge across campus and in the global community in education, outreach, and research, and developing a more sustainable future through rejecting fast fashion in favor of more ethically sourced and innovative sustainable textiles. I'd like to thank each of the panelists for sharing their stories and providing us examples of how we can make a difference for a more sustainable future. I'd also like to thank our moderator, Hiba, for her on-point questions for the speakers and for keeping us on time. I also would like to thank Opal and Luna and the Global Youth Alliance Network for the opportunity to have this important discussion and for bringing us all together. And finally, I would like to thank everyone in the audience for joining us today for this thought-provoking and action-oriented panel presentation. I hope you all take one action from this presentation to moving us all toward a more sustainable future. Luna, would you like to share how participants might find the recording?
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. I would like to let everyone know that the event has been recorded and will be made available on Jen's website and YouTube channel, as well as can be shared with by Canadian Studies Center's platform. So for a wider audience and for those who have registered for the event but cannot join our virtual meeting today, on behalf of the Global Youth Advancement Network team, we sincerely appreciate your invaluable contribution towards empowering global youth. And thank you for everyone for the meeting today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.